Hello and welcome. We are on the end of summer school, so we're almost there. 2 weeks left and just a few more lectures from me. So that's a little bit exciting. You've almost made it through the whole course. So we're skipping over a couple of chapters, which we'll come back to, but we're going to go ahead and move forward with ethical leadership, which is in your text. It's chapter 11, so we skipped over to chapter 11. And one of the reasons I'm doing that is the case study assignment. So this is where you're going to get in-depth information about that, so you might want to keep watching. In the regular class, when we meet in person, you actually have a presentation where you have a group and you come up with a case study and you look at a leadership failure or a leadership challenge, analyze what went wrong and what they could have done better to fix it. And you're going to do that individually and collaboratively. This is going to be a discussion board where you are going to explain in a few paragraphs a leadership challenge or failure. So it can be almost anything, not a personal leadership challenge or failure, a public event, something that we would all know about, like the man who was dragged off, I want to say United Airlines, and how they responded to that incident. It could be any politician and how they responded. Hurricanes, look at Puerto Rico and how people responded, or Texas. Shootings and how people failed or did not execute leadership. So if you're worried, like, where do I get this current case study from? Check the news, because I'm pretty sure there's a leadership failure somewhere in an organization almost every day. You can look at Wells Fargo and the scandal they went through. Target's been through some. McDonald's has been through some. So all kinds of cases. So you need to find one. And certainly, again, Googling, leadership case study or leadership current events, you will hopefully find one. You can even look at our own president at SDSU. Is that going well, or was it a leadership failure so far? These are the kinds of issues I want you to be looking at. One of the reasons we're moving to ethical leadership is because almost all of these public current case studies that we see usually involve violations of ethics. So again, these can be anywhere in the world. You probably won't remember the Concordia, which the captain drove that ship in Italy into the banks. And it got stuck, stranding passengers. Oh, there's another one. What about all of the oil spills on Exxon Valdez and some of the crises that have happened there? Where was the leadership there? So again, there's really endless examples. And when I say current, it doesn't have to be right now. It can be a few years back as well. Really anything. Even if you want to look at something that happened a longer time ago, we're always analyzing the past to get a better grip on how we can improve for the future. And one of the things we don't seem to ever understand is that ethics is involved. And usually we have the problem where leadership leads to, because you cannot get around it, it involves power. Leadership leads to an abuse of power and ethics violations. So keep that case study assignment in mind. You're going to have to post it, what happened, and what the leadership failure was. And then other people, all of you, are going to need to respond to 3 others and say what they could have done differently. So keep that in the back of your mind. That assignment is up. It is posted and it is ready for you to have due this next coming week. So be looking for that current leadership failure case that you can tell us about. All right. As I mentioned, all these cases have problems with ethics, where somebody didn't do what they were supposed to, or abused their power, or lied, etc. So one of the things you can all do is identify if there were any ethical problems. And as you're responding to other people's case study, identify the ethical problems as well. So ethics refers to standards of moral conduct. And as a communication professor, I think one of the most important pieces is information management. Where do we get our information from? When do I give out information? how do I get it? If I do it in a way that's consistent and has an ethical influence. So leaders typically have more information, and I am actually of the proponent that information, almost all information, should be shared as soon as possible with everyone. And you're probably saying, no. Look at these case studies. It's almost always because somebody didn't share critical information, whether it was because they didn't think that the person needed to know about it or they didn't want to share it. This is where problems arise. When people don't share information, we start making it up. Okay? This is how rumors start. When my boss doesn't tell me what's going on, I have to start assuming what's going on. And trust me, my assumptions are usually not good. And it could be nothing. But you can go back even to a relationship level. If your partner isn't sharing certain pieces of information with you anymore, what do? You freak out and you start thinking, well, why aren't they telling me this? And maybe they're with someone else, or maybe this is happening. When we don't have information, we tend to go off in directions of making assumptions, usually negative ones. So as a leader, to me, I will share anything. I've worked for leaders who basically said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this. And I really appreciated that because he was a straight shooter. He told us everything. And because I respected that he did share information, guess what? I didn't share it with people who didn't need to have it. In other words, I respected the fact that he was sharing the information, so I actually held it in more confidentiality, kind of that referent power. I say release information right away. We look at so many. If you are an HBO fan and you saw the Chernobyl disasters, information was not released. Look, it was just they didn't tell anyone. Even our own PSFA building, here, information was not released. People got sick. There were hazardous materials in the building. We have no more classes in there now, but we didn't get the information. This is, again, something I will preach forever and ever. When you get information, share it. I know not everyone agrees with that. I do think you should get information legally. I think you don't want to be eavesdropping or gossiping. If you create an open atmosphere where you'll say everything, you actually will negate a lot of the rumor mill in the workplace. And then lying. We would think we would know this by now, but I just think we rarely ever make it out with a lie intact. Maybe you're better liars. You probably lie to me all the time about stuff, and I believe you. But ultimately, in the business age, one of the reasons people are getting caught more is technology, because we can track everything now. Yes, my school, SDSU, could access all your emails if they wanted to, if they needed to. There's a reason most partners do not want to give their partner their phone code. And it's actually a little suspicious. What are you hiding in there? And you see how, again, that proliferates this idea of worry when we don't have information. But certainly lying about it really only damages your character, and certainly can ruin your entire career. Here are some other leadership failures, really. How about Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods, who's making a comeback from his lying, but Kobe Bryant, one of the few who's made a full comeback from his lies. It damages your character and it damages organizational trust and performance. So it's just not good at any level, even if you think it's a little lie. Volkswagen, here's another leadership case study. For years, they lied about their software. They actually fixed the software in all their cars to be emissions compliant, even though the cars were not emissions compliant. So I just gave you another case study. Look that one up. So we really need to have a place for ethical leadership. Authentic leadership calls for that, and so does transformational. They say they're both a moral type of leadership where we should be managing information appropriately and basically being honest, telling the truth. So these are some myths of information. And what this means is these are not true. So we'll take a look at a couple of these. Information is not a commodity, and that means basically it's something you buy and sell. I hate it when my lights go out in the middle of a lecture. All right, sorry. Information is something you share. It should be free. Share it willingly, please. You would want me to do that with you. What if I said you've got to, well, you would if I said, would you buy the answers to the exam? But that's not ethical. That's part of the problem. And we get very nervous about sharing information. Like, oh, we shouldn't share that with other people. I love it. I'm collaborative. If my colleagues come and ask me for something, I will share it with them. Now, again, there are strategic issues where you say, well, if I share all my secrets with that person, they're going to take all my stuff and compete against me. And I do understand that as a problem in the workforce. It certainly could happen. Generally, I start with trust, and I'll share. If, however, I notice a pattern where my things that I've been sharing now are popping up and being used, and the other person is taking credit for them, or it's undermining me or hurting me in some way, then I become more careful about what I share. Information is not power. I have a lot of information. Doesn't make me very powerful. People have to want that information and need that information. And that's where information can become a game where we hold back. I think, again, I am on the side of share information. More information is not better. You do not need me. Some of you were like, where's the video for emotional intelligence? Where's the lecture? And it was like, the handout did a good job. So that's all you need. You don't need another lecture from me. Information is not value free. It's just like there's no such thing as an informative speech. Everything has some kind of spin to it. We're learning that in the news right now. We think there is no such thing as a value-free news. All news is either fake news or biased news, and everybody's got a spin on something. And we have the information is knowledge. Again, not if you don't understand the information, not if you can't use it, etc., etc. So, some myths of information. And again, as communicators, that's particularly what we're interested in looking at. So, some other issues behind ethics. Ethics is not just the responsibility of the leader, it is also the responsibility of the followers. But a leader, a good leader, an ethical leader says, I'm still accountable for the actions of my followers. So if it still happened under my watch, even if it was one of my followers that did something, I have to stand up and take the responsibility or the blame for it, 100%. I expect that from my boss. If I mess up, I expect she'll have my back and she'll take responsibility, but not, boot me out. So this is very, very interesting because even in the movie, Boone had to take responsibility for everyone, regardless. In some regards, he took responsibility for Ray and his actions when he hurt Rev. He has to be held accountable for what the followers do. A leader who throws his hands up and says, I didn't do it, one of my people did, it's ridiculous. Again, you have to be responsible, both the followers and the leader should be responsible for all of their followers. Power. Here's a good question. I don't necessarily answer it for you, but we'll talk about it real quick. Is it ethical to demand compliance when a follower has a moral objection to the request? Like everything else, it probably depends. I mean, my gut instinct is to say no. If my boss told me to fake a signature on a document, I would say no. I have a moral problem with that. And I think that's a legitimate enough reason to say no. However, if I say I have a moral objection to eating my lunch at 2. I don't know why I would, but I don't like 2 o'clock. That's not a real valid moral reason. So I would probably question that. So I have a moral objection to getting up at 8 in the morning, but I don't know if I can use that. So I think it has to be legitimate, but we do have to listen to people who aren't willing to lie or, again, fake a document or sign something or tell people something that isn't true. You have no right to ask someone to do that. That is essentially what Wells Fargo Bank did, and I can't believe their CEO didn't get a harsher punishment. People were told to open fake accounts for the bank to make money. And I understand a lot of people feel like I had to meet the demand to keep my job. So, what is your ethical line? If you were told to do something that you feel is unethical, but it could lose you your job, how far do you go? It's one of the reasons I've pushed talking about values so much in this class. A lot of people ask me, why did you leave the university when you were a full tenured professor making 6 figures? Ultimately, it was ethical. I didn't want to sign a contract that I didn't believe in. I couldn't say that marriage was only between a man and a woman. I didn't believe that. And I thought it was unethical to sign something that said I did. And I couldn't do it. And I think that you have to know your values, stick by your values, even when it means money. And for me, it wasn't worth the money to lie about who I am and what I believe. So you got me here now. But again, that's a very, very difficult line for a lot of people to draw. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why. How you use personal power, certainly, whether you use it to reward, whether you use it to coerce. We gave you all these compliance gaining strategies and techniques. So what's the ethical implication of them? And that's where we're at today. I think basically, coercing people, manipulating, even physical force in terms of use of personal power is not ethical, flat out. And we're seeing that in, I'm watching on, I think it's on Showtime, The Loudest Voice. It's the Roger Ailes story. Interesting case study if you want to check it out. There's a bunch on Fox and sexual harassment issues and people using their personal power through sexual harassment to get what they want. I mean, at some level, I think all of you can sit there and say, yes, you should not use your personal power to do so. But it happens, and it happens much easier than you would think when you get in a position of power. And we see very, very good leaders stumble because they become powerful and they realize they can do things that maybe they couldn't do before. Some of your ethics may depend on any kind of privilege you bring to the position. If you have special privileges, we're going to talk about the Facebook CCO, Sheryl Sandberg. She had a lot of wealth and social benefits and privilege that she brought with her and began giving advice to women about standing up in the workplace. But she came from a place of privilege and wealth. So not everyone could follow her lead. And we'll talk more about that when we get to diversity and women in leadership. I think you have to check your privileges, obviously, and be loyal and consistent. Consistency, I think, is the core of everything. I've mentioned it so many times when we've talked about leadership. Be consistent. All right, these are the components of ethical behavior, something every organization should have. You should engage in moral sensitivity, moral judgment, motivation, and character. It's simply a step process that says identify any existing ethical problems. Is something going on that shouldn't be? I noticed that tests were being sold to fraternities and sororities who have test banks. Is this an ethical problem? If you can get a copy of a test? I mean, it still happens. I had a student take a picture of a test on their phone, and other students saw the student, reported the student. I mean, it's insane. What course of action should be taken? So we've pretty much, when it comes to cheating or plagiarism, we actually differ in the department. Some of us say it's automatic failure of the assignment, failure of the course. That's why we stress plagiarism so hard. Some of us, and I'm probably in this latter boat where you might fail the assignment, but I don't necessarily fail you in the course. I think that the course of action there, because you may not have known you were plagiarizing. Some of you may know it, but I believe in a little different judgment, but don't be surprised. One of the things I'm going to change next year is everyone keeps uploading everything in Pages and TextEdit, and it's in the syllabus, don't do it or I'll give you a 0. I haven't given anyone a 0 yet, but next semester, I have to go through with this course of action. And that's the moral motivation, follow through on the choice. Because if I don't follow through on the choice, people are going to continue to do what I've asked them not to do anyway. Not that it's that big of a deal, but certainly it's there. So follow through on the choice and implement it. So it's just a process that every organization should look at. All right. One of the big parts of this chapter is looking at the ethical perspectives and which perspectives maybe you align with. And these are the kinds of things I hope you bring out even in your case study. So we're in a little bit of a philosophy lecture, if you will. Kant's categorical imperative basically means without exception. This says, is there something without exception that it is just wrong? Now, for me, I think I am a categorical imperative. So essentially, I just say it's wrong. There are no exceptions. I believe it is wrong to take a human life without exception. Now, you're all screaming at me right now. But what if somebody's holding a gun to your head? I got to be honest. I think I would, even if I had a gun back, I don't know if I could do it because I believe without exception, you should not take a human life, regardless. And someone said, well, what if somebody was about to kill your son? Honestly, before I killed that person, I would probably let them kill me before my son, because I believe it is wrong to take a human life without exception. They said, well, what if you were at war? Again, I would be a very bad soldier. This is me, and this is my personal line. I believe it's wrong. Most of you are not categorical imperativists. You're down at relativism. We'll get there. Utilitarianism is what benefits the greatest good. You've probably heard this perspective before. It has its moments, but certainly you're still leaving a portion of the people out who wanted something different. You're still leaving maybe some large portion. If 60% want it, but 40% don't, that's still, yes, you're meeting the greatest good, but you're still, not complying with 40%. And to me, that's a pretty big difference. So yes, sometimes we have to go with the greatest good, but the problem there is we're still always leaving somebody hanging that doesn't get the good end of the deal. Justice as fairness was a philosophical perspective put forth by Rawls, and he says you have to do what is fair and equitable. And Rawls is fairly complex as a philosopher, so I'm not going to make you understand everything. But there was even a reality show that started for a while, and they thought it was based on the idea that the punishment would match the crime. And you see some of this. It can even be said as biblical. If you steal something, what happens? The hand is cut off. If you, this is far stretched. Just go with me for a minute. If you commit adultery, then someone commits adultery against you. Hopefully, the idea was that it's a fair punishment, that justice is given out fairly. So that's all you really need to know about Rawls. I'm not going to go further than there because it gets a little too complex. But I think as far as leadership is concerned, it comes back to being fair and equitable. And guess what? Consistent every time. That's how you lead. You have to be fair, equitable, and consistent always with everyone in all situations. So, virtue ethics actually started with Aristotle. He listed off many qualities of what he thought was a good man, or good woman. He used the language good man in 350 BC, but it would have been the ideal leader. And this person would have been courageous and magnanimous, etc. So, Aristotle lists all these amazing qualities. Here, I've listed a few of what we now hold to virtue ethics, that you are self-aware, you look at things rationally and balanced, you're authentic, and you're transparent. And when we talk about transparency, this is again sharing all information. Withholding information, I will take a categorical imperative stand on and say, without exception, almost always results in damage of some sort to an organization. Altruism is a philosophical perspective that you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. It's your heart. So if somebody drops their wallet and walks away, I pick up the wallet and run after them. I don't keep it because the right thing to do is to give it back, even if it had like $1 million in cash in it. Eek. Okay, I'd still do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I always return my freaking shopping cart to the little shopping cart stalls because it's the right thing to do, people. Okay, sorry, got a little carried away there. It's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter how far away I parked from the shopping cart stall. The right thing to do is to return the cart. Most of you are at relativism. And relativism basically says there is no right and wrong. It all depends. Trust me, it's your favorite phrase. It all depends. It all depends. Well, that depends. Drives me insane. It's a difficult place to be because everything depends. Is it okay to steal? Well, it depends. I actually even had a student one day say they asked, is it okay to rape someone? And another student replied, well, it depends. What if she was asking for it? And I was like, oh my goodness. Everything depends. We are in this postmodern perspective. But the problem here is if it turns into egoism. And egoism is basically as long as it benefits me. So if it benefits me to lie, great. If it benefits me to sexually harass someone, no problem. So what begins to happen is I begin doing whatever works for me. It depends on what works for me, and then I can go do it without any, guilt per se. Obviously, I think we have to be very careful. Relativism is what we're dealing with in this postmodern time, and things are relative, which is why we need that balanced processing. And when it gets to egoism, certainly I believe this was the case in the Roger Ailes story I'm watching. When it gets to egoism, we've stepped too far into a dangerous place. So those are the ethical perspectives that I would like you to be familiar with. That is the end of ethics. I've probably talked far too long. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about crisis in organizations. That will also set you up nicely for this case study assignment. So be thinking about your ethics and those case studies.